My name is Samantha, 35 years old, living in the northern suburbs of Vermont. Last year, on Thanksgiving Day, I stood in front of the house I grew up in, holding a homemade pumpkin pie. My mother glanced at me and coldly said, "Back door! Guests are at the front." I didn't say a word. I quietly turned around and went through the back like a stranger hired to help. But when a man stepped into the dining room, looked straight at me, and said, "Good evening, Madam President," the entire room went silent. My mother's face turned pale, and my sister, the one who always introduced me as the plumber sibling, nearly dropped her wine glass. Have you ever been pushed aside by your own family, only to turn around and make them see you in a way they never imagined? If you've ever been dismissed because of how you looked or what you did, leave a comment. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and stay with me, because what happened next will take your breath away. I remember the look in my mother's eyes as she watched me step over the kitchen threshold that year. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even blatant disdain. It was that familiar, chilly glance, as if I were part of the old siding of that house, useful enough to remain, but never polished for guests to see. Growing up, I learned early to step aside so my sister Lisa could shine. She was the family's gem, perfect grades, debate champion, Ivy League law school, and an associate at a major firm in Boston by 25. Every holiday, my mother would retell the story of Lisa being on the cover of the student magazine like it was a family award. And my younger brother, Ben, quiet and polite, was in medical residency. Anytime he called home, Mom put him on speaker so the entire room could hear our doctor. And me? I studied construction engineering at a state university. For the first 2.5 years, I was in the top 3 of my class. But during junior year, after a heated argument with Dad about tuition, I dropped out and started working odd jobs. Dad called me stubborn. Mom said nothing. From that day on, every family conversation about children revolved around Lisa and Ben. Family gatherings became the most dreaded days of the year. I was always seated at the far end of the table, or worse, on a folding chair next to the downstairs bathroom. I remember one Christmas when the family posed for a picture in front of the fireplace. Twinkling lights, Lisa in a burgundy dress and Ben in a forest green tie. I came out from the kitchen with a tray of food and heard Lisa tell the photographer, "Hang on, Sam's still busy." Then they snapped the picture. Without me. No one thought that was odd. Another time, after I'd fixed a burst pipe in the basement, Dad had asked for help after a storm. Mom handed me a towel and quietly said, "Wipe off. Guests will be here soon." I stood there, smelling like bleach and mildew, hands freezing from the water, watching her adjust Lisa's hair and check her lipstick. No one ever asked what I did for a living. No one asked where I lived, how I was eating, or if working outside in the middle of winter was exhausting. If I was mentioned at all, it was, "Sam's handy. She's good with plumbing," like it was more consolation than acknowledgement. And when I tried to mention that I was managing a few rental units, Mom nodded briefly and changed the subject to Lisa's recent federal court case. I had grown used to being the background character in my own family, so used to it that I forgot I could be anyone else. Once, at Lisa's 30th birthday party at a fancy downtown hotel, I showed up early to help. I brought a small gift, a handcrafted fountain pen engraved with her name, because I knew she liked journaling. When I gave it to her, she smiled, said thanks, and set it aside. An hour later, she proudly announced her boyfriend's gift, a watch worth nearly $3,000. Mom picked up my pen box, turned it over once or twice, then placed it back on the buffet table between the almond cookies and cheese platter. I wasn't jealous, truly. I just felt invisible. Like I only existed when someone needed a light bulb changed, a cabinet hinge repaired, or folding chairs brought from the garage to the backyard. I once tried to give Mom a glimpse of my world. I invited her to see a model unit in a building I had just finished renovating. I called 3 days in advance, set the time, and hoped she'd stop by to see what her daughter had built. She walked in, glanced around, and said, "Walls are too dark, floors look worn, still smells like paint." Then she headed to her car, saying she had a hair appointment. I stood there in that empty room, a space I had spent 3 months restoring brick by brick, feeling like I'd been slapped with a casual remark. I don't blame them for not loving me the way I needed, but I was tired of convincing myself that what I got was good enough. I no longer wanted to play the role of the quiet, resilient sister. In that Thanksgiving, when Mom pointed toward the back door and said, "Kitchen entrance," was the last time I entered that house without leaving a mark. They had grown used to a world where I was just a shadow, but what they didn't know was that the shadow had become a pillar, silent, steady, holding up more than they ever imagined. And it only took one person calling me by my real title to crack the illusion of their perfect world. I left college on a spring morning, before the sun had broken through the silver clouds. In my pocket, I had nothing but a cracked phone, a pair of gloves stained with old paint, and a note that read, "There won't be any more money for school. Time to grow up." That was the last message Dad left me. Not because he hated me, just because he didn't see value in what I was building. My first job was the night shift at a warehouse by the freeway. Second job, office cleaning in the early morning. Third job, if it counted, was doing odd repairs for neighbors, whoever paid, whatever needed. Some nights I passed out in the staff break room, still smelling of bleach, back aching from the cold floor, eyes burning from staying awake. But I didn't quit. I saved every penny, spent nothing unnecessary. While friends went out, I watched plumbing tutorials on YouTube. Some nights I stayed up watching how to mix mortar that wouldn't crack, or how to measure brick walls accurately. I didn't have a degree, a safety net, or anyone to lift me up. But I had two hands. And those hands started laying the foundation for a new life. At 23, I found a run-down little house in a western suburb, a collapsing structure listed at $24,000. I called the agent, and when she heard my voice, she said, "You know one wall was eaten through by termites, right?" I said, "I don't need it to be perfect. I need it to be mine." I signed the loan papers with my savings and a sliver of credit left, moved in with a folding cot, a secondhand electric stove, and a ceiling fan. That didn't work. Neighbors shook their heads. The mailman asked, "You living here alone?" I smiled. Alone is enough. I started with the kitchen. Walls peeling, cabinets rotting, electrical system barely working. I pulled every panel, learned how to wire circuits, painted the ceiling myself. Day by day, night by night, hauling trash on weekends. Every nail I hammered in, every tile I laid down, proved I was moving forward. No one saw it, no one praised me, but as the house changed, so did I. 9 months later, I rented that house out. A young couple who worked at a local factory signed the lease, and when they moved in, the wife held my hand and said, "This place feels like a real home." I walked to my car, smiling, tears in my eyes. I had created a place to belong, not just for me, but for someone else. I used the rent to pay down the loan, then borrowed again to buy a second property. It was in better shape than the first, but had a leaking pipe and roof damage. I fixed it in 4 months, rented it out, from 2 to 3, then 4. I learned to work with part-time help, when to hire, how to oversee construction, draft leases. I studied housing laws by reading municipal codes at the city library like I was learning a new language. Each time I signed a new lease, I remembered those family dinners where I sat in silence and I knew this was what I was meant to build. 5 years later, I partnered with a college friend, Marcus, and started Reeves and Webb Property Management. We had 6 units and were managing 11 others. Marcus came from a banking background and handled finance. I ran operations, maintenance, and logistics. We were the perfect team, filling in each other's gaps, backing each other's strengths. We focused on what others ignored, keeping costs down, apartments clean, and genuinely caring for tenants. I remember a woman named Esther, over 80 years old, renting a ground-level unit on Pine Street. Every winter, I personally brought her extra heaters, sealed every door gap myself. One year, she wrote me a handwritten card. "Thank you for making me feel not forgotten." 10 years after leaving school, we owned 36 properties, residential and small commercial. We employed 12 full-time staff, worked with nearly 30 independent contractors, and provided housing to over 200 families at rates below the city average. I still live in a modest apartment. I still drive my old pickup truck and wear my worn-out coat on freezing winter days. Not because I can't afford a more comfortable life, but because I've never needed a flashy exterior to know where my value lies. That first house I bought back then has been repainted. It now has a white fence and a red maple tree planted outside the window. The current tenant is a single mother with 2 small children. Every time I walk past, I see the kids playing in the yard, their laughter echoing through the afternoon air. And I think to myself, if my family couldn't see who I am, it's okay. Because I've seen myself, clear, steady, and no longer afraid to walk alone. I was carrying a tray of pastries out of the kitchen when the door between the dining room and hallway suddenly opened. Mr. Green, the man who rents an office in the commercial property I own near City Hall, walked in with his signature scarf and a beaming smile. Everyone in the room turned to look at him as if his arrival marked a shift in the evening. He shook my father's hand, nodded at my mother, and then his eyes landed on me, still frozen in the doorway, tray in hand. "Well, Samantha," he exclaimed with cheer. "Didn't expect to see you here. Still remember me? Green, 3rd floor, corner unit on Maple." I nodded, gently setting the tray down on the nearby table. "Of course I remember." Mr. Green turned toward everyone, especially my mother near the fireplace, and grinned. "I just have to say this. Samantha owns the building where I lease my office. No one manages a property like she does. Thorough, on time, and truly cares about her tenants. Her place is always spotless and runs like clockwork." His words dropped into the room like a weight hitting hardwood. I heard Lisa's wine glass clink softly against the table. Ben stood still, his lips parted as if trying to speak, but no words came. My mother froze. Not the dramatic kind you see in soap operas, but a rigid silence, as if trying to patch up a proud wall that just got a massive hole punched through it. I slowly walked over to Mr. Green, my voice calm, yet loud enough for everyone to hear. "Yes, I own a few rental properties in Burlington." I looked directly into my mother's eyes, then Lisa's, "including the one where Mr. Green works." Mr. Green chimed in, seemingly unaware he had just triggered a family reckoning. "I always tell my partners, don't be fooled by appearances. The owner of this building is one of the sharpest, most thoughtful professionals I've ever worked with." The atmosphere in the dining room shifted with every word he spoke. The cheerful chatter that had filled the space earlier was now replaced with hushed murmurs and awkward glances. A part of me almost laughed, not out loud, but inside, laughed at the irony, the sadness, that in 35 years of living in this house, no one had ever spoken about me like that. Until a stranger did. Lisa cleared her throat and set her wine glass down, trying to regain composure. "Wow, that's unexpected. You never told me you owned real estate?" I looked at her, no blame in my eyes, just exhaustion. "You never asked." My mother sighed, turning toward the sofa and smoothing her dress as if trying to disappear into the satin. "I thought you were still doing odd repair jobs, helping neighbors now and then." I stood tall, my gaze steady. I did, and I learned from it. How to read blueprints, calculate costs, manage sites, and listen to tenants. Every paint stroke, every pipe fitting, every midnight call. I did it myself. Learned it. Survived it. Ben finally found his voice, speaking softly as if afraid to break the tension. 36 buildings, really? I nodded. 36. Some we own outright, others are managed by my company. Every tenant has my phone number. I don't hand off responsibility to some voicemail. If an HVAC fails at midnight, I know about it in 10 minutes. Lisa gave a small, skeptical laugh. "You really kept that quiet, Sam." I met her gaze without flinching. I wasn't hiding. I was silent because every time I spoke, the response was just another form of silence. I mentioned my first apartment. You said I should find a real job. I invited Mom to tour a model home. She complained about the smell of paint. No one asked how I made a living, what I dreamed of, what I was building. They saw paint-stained clothes and assumed I was failing. Mom nervously adjusted her scarf, speaking softly. "No one thought you were failing, Samantha. We just didn't know." "Because no one looked," I whispered. "Because I didn't fit the family portrait you wanted on the wall. I got left out of the frame. Silence fell again. But this time it wasn't awkward. It was honest. I didn't say another word. I didn't have to. My presence was enough to be seen. Not because I shouted, not because I begged, but because they had finally heard something they'd never bothered to ask: who I was, what I'd done, and why I always stood quietly outside the door they closed. 2 days after Thanksgiving dinner, I got the first message from Lisa in nearly 4 months. Just one line: "Are you free tomorrow afternoon? I'd love to grab lunch and introduce you to a few colleagues." I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering above the reply. It took me nearly 10 minutes to type, "Do you want to meet me or meet the assets in my name?" The next day, I showed up at the cafe Lisa picked, a fancy place with cream-colored linens and no prices on the menu. She was already seated with two suited men, laughing like we were all old friends from high school. When I arrived, she stood, gave me a quick hug, and pulled out a chair. "This is my sister, Samantha. She's doing great in real estate." One of the men nodded and shook my hand. "Heard a lot about you. Lisa says you're growing strong in Burlington." I gave a small smile. I'm not used to people hearing about me. I'm used to opening the doors myself. That line paused the table for just a beat, but Lisa recovered quickly. She's always been direct like that. "That's why I thought you two should meet. They represent a new real estate investment fund. They're looking for experienced local partners with actual holdings." I rested my hand on the table and looked Lisa straight in the eye. "When did you think of me? Before or after you realized I owned the building Mr. Green leases?" Lisa sipped her tea and avoided my eyes. "Samantha, I won't deny I was surprised, but I see real potential in you. Instead of doing it all alone, why not let your experience build something bigger?" I nodded, but said nothing more. I'd heard enough. 3 days later, Ben called. I was at a job site, checking the heating system install at a historic townhouse. His voice was warm, gentle, almost hesitant. "Got a minute? I want to run something by you." I signaled the lead engineer to hold and stepped behind the pickup. "Go ahead." "I'm planning to expand our family clinic network. We've got one in Montpelier, and I'm negotiating for space in South Burlington. But I'll need capital to move fast." He paused. "If you're interested, maybe you could come in as a founding investor." I looked up at the silver-gray sky as flurries began to fall. My tone stayed even. "Ben, 10 years ago, did you ever ask me how I earned a living?" That's not fair." "No. It is, because back then, when you all thought I was failing, no one invited me into anything. Now that you know I own property, suddenly we're talking about investments. You just thought we were family, so if there was a chance, you didn't want to miss it." I finished her sentence. "Thanks, but I invest in what I believe in, and I don't believe in anything that starts with suddenly caring." That was where the conversation ended. I didn't hear from Ben again. Not until a week later, when Mom called. "We're having a family meeting this Sunday, just us, no guests. There are a few things we'd like to discuss. Make sure you come." I was going to say no, but then I showed up. Partly because I wanted to see what they were going to propose, partly because I wanted to hear them finally say out loud what they once believed I didn't deserve to know. My parents' living room had been rearranged like a boardroom. The armchairs faced a large coffee table. A thick packet of documents lay in the center. My father sat at the head of the table, Lisa on his right, Ben on his left. Mom brought out a silver teapot, set it down, and took her seat next to Dad. Dad spoke first. "Samantha, thank you for coming. We know you're busy, but this is something the whole family should discuss together. After Thanksgiving, everyone was really impressed with what you've built, and we think it's time we combined our strengths." I stayed silent, unmoved. Lisa opened the packet and handed me a copy. "We've put together a draft proposal, a family investment fund. Everyone contributes assets, cash, tangible property, or professional networks. Then we co-own new ventures together." Ben nodded. "You've got management experience, Lisa brings legal structure, I have medical expertise. Mom and dad have capital and long-standing relationships. And you've got a solid foundation in real estate. If we all combine, we'll build an empire, Lisa added, eyes gleaming. A true family legacy. I flipped through the pages. Flowery language, attractive numbers, vague commitments. I set the paper down, my voice steady as always. And if I say no? Mom gently placed her teacup on the saucer. Why would you say no when the whole family wants to move forward together? I looked her straight in the eye, because you just said move forward together. But I remember clearly, on the road leading here, I walked it alone. I left my parents' house that afternoon with a heaviness in my chest like stone. I wasn't angry, I wasn't sad, I just felt a sharp, paralyzing clarity. The people sitting in front of me weren't inviting me into an investment project. They were trying to wedge their way into the life I had built, brick by brick, door by door. And when I laid the documents down and said I wasn't joining any family fund that required me to put up my assets as collateral, I saw Dad's eyes dim. And Lisa, for a brief second, looked at me as if I'd just denied them a privilege they believed was rightfully theirs. The next morning, I was making coffee in my office when my assistant knocked, holding an envelope stamped by the Burlington Housing Department. I tore it open and froze. The city inspector was demanding a full review of all 6 apartment buildings I owned within the next 7 days. Reason? Numerous complaints from residents about unsafe living conditions, electrical and plumbing violations. I immediately called Marcus, my co-founder. He arrived not long after, still wearing a thick sweater and knit cap, snow dusting his shoulders. I tossed the letter onto the desk. "It's started," I said. The moment I said no to them, Marcus read it through and looked up. This is pressure tactics. Could be them, could be someone they hired, but it's definitely coordinated. Not even an hour later, our company's inbox started lighting up with alerts from property websites. Over 30 negative reviews posted on the same day, all from names I didn't recognize, all with eerily similar wording. Dark, moldy apartments, heating never works, irresponsible landlord. Electrical repair refused, almost caused a fire. Never picks up the phone, abandons tenants. I sat in silence watching the screen, each lie stacking up like nails, hammered into the reputation I'd spent a decade building. The reviews were written with carefully constructed malice, false enough that I knew they were fake, but believable enough to make outsiders doubt. Marcus tapped the table, tension on his face. We need to move fast, call all contractors, vendors, pull our latest inspection reports. We need paperwork, numbers, proof. We can't let vague accusations undo everything. Before I could respond, the desk phone rang. It was our insurance company's rep. His voice wasn't hostile, but it was tight. We received an anonymous report alleging your company has failed to meet safety standards for tenants, skipped routine maintenance, and may have violated fire safety codes. I cut in. We have complete maintenance logs, signed inspection reports, compliance records. Every building is reviewed every 6 months. I'm ready to provide anything you need. We'll need all of it, and during the investigation, your insurance agreement may be subject to review. I hung up the phone and looked at Marcus. You heard all that, right? He nodded. They're trying to wear you down. I turned to the screen and opened my inbox. Email after email. Cancellations from our suppliers, waste management, even the cleaning service. Reasons. Terminating due to suspected legal violations, or just no longer credit eligible. I gave a dry laugh, smart, hitting every pressure point. No lawsuits, no media, just keeping me under suspicion long enough to crack everything. Marcus looked at me, no longer calm. Are you certain this is your family? I didn't answer right away, but in my mind one name appeared. Lisa. She once mentioned having connections at city offices. She knew how to make something look true just by planting enough doubt. She once said, "Whoever controls the story controls the fallout." Now I was watching her words unfold line by line. I stood, grabbed my coat. I need to inspect every building. Tell Jenny to cancel all meetings today. If anyone calls, tell them I'm busy. Defending the truth. Marcus placed a hand on my shoulder. You're not alone in this. I looked at him, eyes calm but cold. I've never been alone, Marcus. I just got used to doing everything myself. But this time, they're not just attacking me. They're trying to destroy the only thing I've built, without owing anyone a thing. It took me nearly a week to inspect every building, gather all the documents, contact inspectors, submit everything, and respond to every false review. During that time, my company operated like it was walking on thin ice. One more bad headline and the whole thing could collapse. But I don't break easily. I started combing through every email, anonymous message, every suspicious account. Tracked IPs, punctuation quirks, spelling mistakes. I wasn't an investigator, but I'd taught myself how to build houses from YouTube. I knew how to find patterns in chaos. One name kept repeating in the complaint forms, Helen S. At first I thought it was random, but by the fourth time, I stopped. Helen was Lisa's middle name. I pulled up our company's records, logs of people who had scheduled tours of our model units. On one single day, 3 weeks ago, 4 requests came in from different emails, but all linked to the same IP address, registered to the law office where Lisa worked. I stared at the screen. This wasn't a suspicion anymore. The pieces lined up cleanly. Lisa wrote the fake reviews. Lisa sent the anonymous complaints. Lisa was the one who tried to bring down everything I'd built. I printed every document and typed each line into a clear, structured spreadsheet. I wasn't planning to argue. I wanted the truth to shine through like a crack in the wall under a floodlight. It didn't need shouting. It spoke for itself. That evening, I texted Lisa. Can we meet at the old cafe tomorrow at 6 a.m.? I need to talk privately. She came just as I expected. Same charcoal gray blazer, straight hair, walking in like someone who always controlled the room. She sat down, crossed her legs, and held her peppermint tea like she'd already won. What's this about? I slid the file across the table. This! She flipped open the first page, freezing as she saw the anonymous reviews side by side with the IP information, law office address, fake Google accounts, and every piece of data I'd collected. I said nothing. After nearly 2 minutes of silence, Lisa set her cup on the table. What are you planning to do with this? Haven't decided yet. I just wanted to hear your reason. Lisa exhaled deeply. Her eyes didn't carry their usual sharpness. Because you wouldn't share. You stand there, proudly sitting on millions in real estate, while the rest of the family is struggling to stay afloat. Were you planning to keep all of it for yourself? I looked at her, voice low. You think sabotaging me was the way to force me to share? Lisa didn't blink. It wasn't sabotage, just pressure. When your system starts to crack, you'll be forced to choose. Either hold on and lose it piece by piece, or share and salvage. I nodded, slowly pulling the papers back. Did it ever cross your mind that if you just asked, I might have been willing to help? I'm not selfish, but I won't be manipulated like a pawn. Lisa pressed her lips together. You've changed, Samantha. You weren't this cold before. I'm not cold. I've just learned how to live without measuring my worth through someone else's eyes. And if you think you can scare me into giving away what took me 10 years to build, then you never understood me at all. She stood without a word, leaving her tea half full. I didn't stop her. I didn't need to. Because in that moment, I knew. She was the one unraveling, not me. On the way home, I rolled down the car window. The snow had melted. A soft breeze moved through my hair, carrying the damp scent of fresh soil. I didn't feel hurt. I didn't feel angry. I just felt clear. I was no longer the little sister seated near the restroom at family parties. I'd become someone they had to scheme to pull back in, and I'd lived long enough to see every mask fall. I'd planned to let it go after that cafe meeting, but 2 days later I received an anonymous email at the office. If you don't want the world to know your company took funding from questionable sources, you'd better stay silent. I sat frozen, staring at the flashing text, not because I was scared, but because it confirmed one thing. They weren't done. This was just the beginning. And now, I had no choice but to fight back. That night, I called my attorney. Miss Jenkins, a retired consultant, once renowned for handling internal corporate disputes. After I laid out everything, she paused for a few seconds, then asked, "Do you have solid evidence?" I sent her everything I'd gathered. The IP logs, fake emails, threatening messages, even the recording of my meeting with Lisa. Completely legal since our state allows single-party consent for evidence. 3 days later, Miss Jenkins invited me to her old law office, once the site of some of the region's biggest lawsuits. On her desk lay a nearly 3-page article draft. The bold title read, "Financial Sabotage and Psychological Abuse Within My Own Family, a Sister's Testimony." I didn't hesitate to sign my name. We reached out to the local paper, the Monroe Times. The editor-in-chief, a man in his 50s known for exposing tax fraud and political corruption, read through the piece. When he got to the section detailing Lisa's impersonation, her fake reviews, and the anonymous threats, he nodded, eyes serious. "If you're brave enough to speak, we're brave enough to print." The article ran Monday morning, front page. It included an audio clip from our cafe conversation and verified images of the supporting documents, each vetted by 2 independent law firms. Local social media exploded. Within 10 hours, the story had over 50,000 shares. My office phone rang non-stop. Residents, reporters, even former clients called to offer support or share stories of being dismissed or manipulated by family. Lisa's law firm issued an immediate statement suspending all her legal work and launching an internal investigation. The state's ethics board began their own review. The Department of Justice requested an in-person meeting. They asked me to submit original evidence and to refrain from sharing further details publicly to avoid impacting the case. I agreed. I didn't need more noise. I just wanted the truth to stand. A week later, Lisa's law license was temporarily suspended pending the outcome. Her office underwent a full audit. The woman who once lectured on legal ethics now sat in front of a disciplinary panel, explaining why her work devices were tied to criminal complaints. Meanwhile, I kept showing up at the office every morning. I checked each unit, spoke with tenants, answered press calls with the calm I had earned. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. But I felt completely clear inside. One tenant once told me, "You don't feel like a landlord. You feel like someone who keeps her word." Maybe he was right. I've never needed to prove I'm better than anyone. I just need to live right. But when someone tries to trample that with deceit and greed, I'm not afraid to step into the light, not for revenge, but to draw a line, to show where justice ends, where family bends, and where I refuse to play. One late October afternoon, as golden leaves blanketed the back porch outside my office, I got a call from Mom. She didn't ask if I was busy, didn't give a reason, just said, "I want to see you, just once, no one else." Her voice wasn't proud. It wasn't cold either. It sounded like she was holding something fragile that might break any second. I agreed to meet at the Green Lake Cafe, the one where I waited tables when I was 18. It was still there, a little more worn, but still filled with that warm pine scent whenever the air turned crisp. Mom arrived early. She sat near the window in a gray moon sweater. Her hair was grayer than I remembered, her hands a bit slower as she poured her tea. When I walked in, her eyes lifted with a flicker of surprise. "Samantha," she said, then paused, as if searching for the right words. "Thank you for coming." I nodded, silent. We sat in quiet for a few minutes, only the sound of a spoon stirring porcelain. Finally, she spoke. I don't know where to begin. I can't undo the past, but if there's still a way, I want to rebuild something, even if just a piece. We're still a family, aren't we?" I looked into her eyes. Not with anger, not with softness. I'd just traveled too far from the days when I waited for a hug. Do you know what my favorite color is? I asked. She frowned, hesitant. Red? I shook my head gently. Terracotta orange. I've loved it since middle school. Every year you gave me a red sweater for Christmas. You never asked. She lowered her gaze, fingers tightening around the edge of the tablecloth. I continued. Mom, do you know what I majored in during college? Not the school, my actual major. A long pause. She murmured, I remember it was some kind of engineering, but I leaned back, cupping the teacup in my hands, letting the heat warm my fingertips. I studied civil engineering. I dropped out because I couldn't afford the tuition. You didn't know that because you never asked. That year, I wrote Dad a handwritten letter asking to borrow money. He replied with a blank check and a note that said, "Learn to be practical." She stayed silent. A thin mist appeared at the corners of her eyes. But I didn't stop. I taught myself how to repair houses, bought and sold property under my name, registered my own business. My company is called Hearthstone Living because the only place that ever felt warm to me was Grandma's little kitchen. I placed my hand gently but firmly on the table. And you didn't know that either. She looked up, eyes glistening. I'm sorry. I gazed out the window. A breeze rustled past, sweeping up a few dry leaves. No one has the right to be called family if they've never seen the real me. If love only comes after I succeed, then that love was never whole to begin with. She cried, quietly, no sobs. I didn't get up to hold her, but I didn't leave either. I just sat there, across from the woman who once taught me how to tie my shoelaces but never learned how to hear her daughter's heart beating. It wasn't until the daylight began to fade that she finally lifted her head. You might not forgive me now, but I will learn. I want to know who you are. If you'll let me. I looked at her, and for the first time in years, I didn't see the woman who ordered, judged, or pushed. I just saw a mother lost in her own home, trying to find the door that was once open, but now locked from the inside. I didn't answer right away. I simply took the last sip of tea, stood up, and said softly, "Seeing me isn't hard. Truly seeing me, that's what you need to learn." Then I left, stepping past the cafe's threshold, leaving behind the soft chime of the wind bell. On a mid-November morning, I stood in front of the King County Courthouse, holding a civil judgment that read in bold, I had won the case. The court ruled that the defamation, false reporting, and intentional interference with my business all constituted libel and a breach of professional ethics. Lisa was absent from the final hearing. Her law firm's representative bowed his head in silence as the judge read each offense, recorded, printed, and verified. Part of me felt sorrow, but the rest only felt peace. I had followed the truth all the way without ever needing to raise my voice. 3 weeks later, I received a letter from the city of Seattle. The affordable housing project my team and I had built in the south end of the city was awarded Outstanding Sustainable Development Model of 2025. Alongside the award was a new partnership proposal from the local government to expand the project into the Rainier Beach area. I laid the letter on my desk and sat quietly. Every wall I replastered, every faucet I replaced, every apartment I scrubbed mold from suddenly held meaning, not because of the recognition, but because someone had finally seen it. I decided to host a Thanksgiving dinner at the newly renovated house in Beacon Hill, a white house with soft green trim, a long front porch, and a large oak table right in the backyard. I didn't send out fancy invitations, I just messaged each person. If you don't have anywhere to go this Thanksgiving, come to my place, we'll roast chicken, no judgment, and everyone gets a seat. That night, my backyard glowed with string lights. The scent of pumpkin pie drifted through the window screens. Kids ran in circles around the maple tree, while the adults chatted warmly around the table. There was Mr. Green, a former tenant, who brought mashed potatoes made from his late wife's recipe. A young couple who once paid rent late but always kept their home spotless. And my staff. Those who stayed when everything was falling apart. As I laid out the salad, a little boy tugged at my sleeve. He was about 6, with bright brown eyes and curly hair like a sheepdog. "Miss Samantha," he asked shyly, "are you really the landlord?" I crouched down, holding his tiny hand. Looking around the table, where laughter echoed, food was passed hand to hand, and names were called with real warmth, I felt something stir deep in my chest. I didn't see a single person from my old family here, but I didn't feel like anything was missing. Because everyone sitting at this table knew who I was. Not because I was rich, not because I was successful, but because they had seen me weather storms without ever demanding applause. I smiled and told the boy, "I'm someone who's exactly where she belongs." He winked playfully and ran off. I took my seat on the wooden bench, poured more apple cider for the person beside me, and began telling a story. About the first house I bought for $24,000, about leaking pipes, moldy walls, and nights I slept on a concrete floor with only a small fan beside me. And about the day I realized family isn't defined by blood, but by the people who sit next to you when you have nothing left to boast about. That night, while washing dishes in the open kitchen, my hands still smelling faintly of basil, I glanced out the window at the yard where the lights had begun to dim. The air had turned colder. Dry leaves scattered across the patio, but my heart no longer felt the same chill as years past. I didn't need anyone's validation because I had learned to see myself, and I no longer stood alone. Maybe my story mirrors something you've been through, or maybe it's completely different. But if you've ever been dismissed in your own home, pushed away from the dinner table, or made to feel like someone not worth remembering, then perhaps you understand that feeling more than anyone else. What do you think about the way I chose to end it all? If you were in my place, would you forgive or carve your own path like I did? I believe sometimes what we need isn't to be loved the right way, but to have the courage to walk away when love becomes a one-sided obligation. Because no one is born to be silently overlooked forever. Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd truly love to hear your side of the story. And if you're someone who finds meaning in stories about family, pain, healing, and the quiet strength it takes to rediscover yourself, consider subscribing to this channel. Because I believe every one of us has a moment when we need to be heard, to be seen, and to know we're not alone.